Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Welcome to Health Oddity. This is episode number 43, and I'm joined today with only two-thirds, well, myself included, two-thirds of the team. It's myself, Paul Bassett, and I'm here with James St. Pierre. How you doing, James?
I'm very good, and I'm excited to talk with today's guest. So it's a shame that Pete can't be here, but we're going to have a good one.
Yeah, I think he's got some kind of bug, non-descriptive about what exactly it was, but I'm sure he's suffering in a bed at the moment. So today we're really lucky to get Dave Whitley on as a guest. Now, Dave, we've come across Dave for many, many, many years, and actually Peter trained with him in his first certification under Strong First, kettlebell certification, and that was one of the major kind of stepping stones in his career to become a personal trainer. But Dave has a great reputation, not only as an incredibly strong individual physically, but also has great insight, not only into the history of strength, but also what it takes to be strong, not only in body, but also in mind. And one of the reasons we've got Dave on is because his experience really covers so many areas. And I think as soon as we start talking, we're going to have so many gems of information. And part of what we do on this podcast is due to incredibly interesting people who have experience and can let you think slightly different about your journey so that it doesn't become this just constant battle with calories, and that you can actually discover something about yourself. So I'm going to do just a quick introduction to Dave. Dave is an instructor, not only in kettlebells, but predominantly he's an enthusiast around strength. And he's written a number of books, a couple of which I have: Taming the Bent Press, which is an old-time strongman technique. It was a fantastic insight into how people used to train in the past. And then there's the Superhuman You, which is about releasing your physical and mental potential. And Dave has lectured around the world and turned up to conferences and things like that, doing not only feats of strength, but also taking people through what it takes to get to that level of strength and the mindset involved. Dave is from the States, and I'm going to turn over to Dave. Hello and welcome to Health Oddity. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, since there's a 6-hour time difference, and thanks for having me on.
No worries. So are you still in Nashville?
I am about 30 or 40 minutes south of Nashville, Tennessee. So I lived out in the country a little bit, but if you wanted to fly to see me, you would land in Nashville and I would come pick you up.
Fantastic. I've seen plenty of videos of you in the past jumping into ice cold baths outside. So I wasn't quite sure what the weather was like, but I always thought it was quite warm. But I know you really got into getting those ice baths in the past.
Yeah, it's warm almost all the time here. And by warm, I mean, we don't really get snow more than about 2 or 3 days out of the year. And it'll get down into like right around freezing, but not like going to Minnesota or Chicago or someplace like that, where it's really cold for several months out of the year. So what I wound up doing for my cold training was I bought a big freezer that the top opens up, and I filled it up with water and had it running on a timer so that the water would start to freeze over a little bit, and then I could get in and out of that. And I called it my redneck cryo chamber for the longest time because it was outside, it was all rusty, and the water was kind of nasty. But unfortunately, about 2 months ago, it completely stopped working, and I literally just last week had it hauled off to the scrap. So I don't have a freezer to train my cold stuff in right now. So it's just getting hot here, and that's all we've got.
So you unplug it before you get into it, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely, because I'm smart.
Yeah, I was about to say, that would be a one-trick pony, wouldn't it, otherwise? Right. Yeah. So as you could probably tell, that Dave likes to experiment and to push the boundaries of what he can do. So Dave, could you just give us a little bit of a background in what you're doing at the moment and what's kind of brought you to where you are in terms of your business and your mindset at the moment?
Sure. What I'm doing at the moment requires the backstory. So let me give you the short version of that. When I was a little kid, I was overweight. I had a terrible stutter, and I got picked on and made fun of a lot. I'm 51 years old, so this was in the late 70s, and really got into comic books and science fiction and fantasy, all of that kind of stuff, and wanted to be superhuman. But I realized that there was like a difference between what happens in the world that we live in and what was going on in the movies and comic books and stuff, until I saw Lou Ferrigno on television. And I realized that he was wearing makeup and he was wearing a wig and prosthetics and all that, but that wasn't a costume. That was really him. He was really big and strong like the Hulk. And that got me started on the idea that it was possible for a human being to achieve those kinds of things. Now, I immediately upon seeing that got the classified section of the newspaper and started looking for gamma radiation as like an 8-year-old boy, and come by, couldn't even find so much as like a radioactive spider, you know. So kind of set that aside until I saw a few months later, the movie Pumping Iron was on public television, and Lou Ferrigno was in it, obviously, with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Franco Columbu and all of the golden age mid-70s bodybuilding champions. And that was my introduction to the fact that if you want to be able to pick up heavy things, you have to start picking up heavy things. So I got a set of weights, and that started my lifelong on again, off again relationship with strength. If we fast forward to the early 2000s, I got introduced to the world of kettlebells, got involved in the RKC, and then became a master instructor in the RKC, became a gym owner, was part of Strong First for a few years when all of that happened, and ultimately got out of that in 2016, and got out of the gym business in 2018. Parallel to that, in about 2006 or 2007, I met a guy named Bud Jeffries. And if you guys don't know who Bud Jeffries is, go look him up on Instagram or TikTok. He does some phenomenal stuff. And he introduced me to a guy named Dennis Rogers, who is, without argument, he is the most successful performing strongman to date in history. He's been on television more times than you can count, which means that he's been viewed by millions upon millions of people all over the world. Through meeting Dennis, one of the first things that I saw was this small, like 5'8", 165-pound man bend a wrench. I think you guys call him a spanner over there. And I couldn't quite process what the hell I just saw. So I wound up meeting him after seeing that video. I actually used to do a website where I would mail out physical CDs of interviews. This predates podcasts, right? This is in 2007 or so. Got Dennis on my list, did a interview with him. He sent me a bunch of DVDs of his stuff, and ultimately wound up becoming a student of his. Fast forward to 2020, Dennis and I had done a bunch of workshops together under the heading of Old Time Strongman University. And in 2020, he effectively retired from performing and teaching and handed the mantle of Old Time Strongman University over to me. So here I am after all of these decades of seeing Lou Ferrigno on television, and I'm been passed the torch by the greatest strongman in history to continue to carry on his legacy. So I'm extremely honored with that. In about 2013, I decided that I really wanted to focus on feats of strength and on performing and speaking, because I started to see parallels between the mental aspects of training for feats of strength and achieving success in other areas. That led me down a path of studying people like Napoleon Hill and Wallace Wattles and Bob Proctor and Neville Goddard. And I incorporated the stuff that I learned and applied to my own life outside of feats of strength into a formula for success that I started using as a keynote speech for like corporate events. And I would do it at colleges and schools, that sort of stuff. And I would use feats of strength as a way to illustrate certain points of the message that I'm delivering, you know, to get the audience more involved and to show them that impossible is really just whatever you decide it's going to be. And for me, it was my job description. So all of that was going swimmingly. Got out of the gym business completely in 2018, just before my son was born. And then 2019 was a lot of shows and a lot of travel. And in the back of my mind, I started formulating the idea that I want to turn this into a full-blown online coaching program and let that be the primary thing, because I had a child later in life than most people do, and I want to be there for every moment that I can be. So I'm like, how can I get off the road and still deliver what I want to deliver and still pay the bills with it? So I started playing with the idea of a coaching program, and then COVID hit, and literally my entire year got canceled. There was not a single show that I had booked, except for one in January, which is before the pandemic happened, that survived the pandemic. There's one that got postponed, I think 4 times, and it's still on for August of this year. And it's I have 2 shows booked this year. I was doing, 10 or 15 every year, and I have 2 shows booked this year, and I'm going to do those. And that's pretty much all the road time that I'm going to have this year. So I was left with a little other option than, okay, how can I coach people online with this stuff? I started formulating it, got involved in the internet marketing world through ClickFunnels. And we were talking before we came on the air. I did my first foray into that was a guided coaching thing from ClickFunnels called the One Funnel Away Challenge. And the product that came about as a result of that was the One Dumbbell Challenge that we were talking about off air before we got started. And I learned a lot from that. And I thought, okay, I can do this. I can figure out the things that I don't know, and started putting it all together. And to fast forward to now, we have superhumanucoaching.com. There's a pretty cool little webinar presentation there that gives an overview of some of the aspects of the philosophy. There's some very valuable training information in that you can take away without having to purchase anything. And if you're interested in working with me, there are instructions on there on how to book a call to work one-on-one with me. And the next phase of this is going to be streamlining and systematizing that into a coaching course that is online, that I don't have to be present for every call. So it's going to be a go at your own pace kind of coaching course. And that's what I'm working on right now for that. So I think that pretty well covers all of it.
Fantastic. I mean, it's something to be said. I mean, it's interesting. We had a few people on over the last few months. And James, probably one of those people as well, is where superheroes have played such a massive role in the development of someone's kind of career. I mean, we had Tim Anderson on about a month ago.
I love Tim.
And I remember doing your one dumbbell challenge, and one of the things you had in there was some of the original strength movements in there. It was very influential for him. I think it was Superman, wasn't it?
Yes.
What is it? I mean, is it just the sheer fantasy of it, or is it just? I mean, what does it unlock, do you think, in someone's mind when they see this? Because in a way, it's so removed from reality, it almost seems farcical that it would become influential. But it is. I mean, I even used to think, want to be Spider-Man. So what is it you think that's kicking that imagination going?
Well, initially for me as a kid, it was a way to not be picked on. I really identified with the Hulk because he was invincible, he was impregnable, he was incredibly strong. And as an adult looking back on it, I realized that part of the appeal was his superpowers were fueled by his anger. And because I was being picked on and made fun of, because I had a stutter and because I was overweight, I really identified with that. And I'm really, really pleased that ultimately it turned out that the fat kid with the stutter wound up being a strong man who speaks to people on stage for a living. So I feel that every bit of that has been resolved from my childhood with that. And if you pay attention when I'm talking, occasionally I will still stutter. That little kid with the stutter is still in me. I just don't let him run the show. I let him know that everything's going to be okay and that I got this, and that if I do stutter, so what? Everyone has their imperfections as humans. Like, even, every Superman has his kryptonite. Every every superhero has some sort of a thing that isn't at a huge superhuman level. From a practical standpoint, as an adult living in the 3D reality that we live in, I realized that if I redefined what superhuman meant, that it was absolutely applicable as long as I worked within the confines of the physics that we have to deal with in the world that we live in. And my definition, and I'm a huge fan of getting very clear on the words that I use and the terms that I use and what they mean and how they express things. There's a quote that stuck with me from that I heard a long time ago from a guy, a combatives martial arts guy named Tony Blauer, who said that the clarity with which we define something, just throwing words around willy-nilly and don't know what they mean, then we're not getting as much use out of those words as we do when we give them a clear definition and assign a clear meaning to them. And that takes a little bit of attention and effort on the part of whoever's doing it to really analyze the words that they habitually use, what they might actually mean, and conform them into an ideal that serves us. So for me, I started looking at the root of superhuman powers. Human is the experience that we're having. I don't really have to define human for anybody. Super comes from a Latin root that means over, above, and beyond, or exhibiting the characteristics of its type to an extreme or excessive degree. And power comes from the Latin root potere, which means to be able, which is also the root of our word potential. So our power and our potential are rooted in the same place, even in the language that we use in English. So by taking that, I look at what is something that I have that is an innate ability that I would be able to do, like speaking or doing feats of strength as a human, and how can I develop that to an extreme or excessive degree? And so we wind up with a performing strongman who speaks to people about how their mind works. Now, most of the people that I speak to or that I talk to are not interested in doing feats of strength. They're interested in having better relationships or improving their general happiness or something to do with a business that they might be running. Or they have a job that they don't like and they want to get out of that and start doing their own thing. All of those things are rooted in their potential, in their power. It's things that they are able to do. And so the first thing that I want to do is give you permission to be bigger than you are, and start looking at what would it be like if you achieved an extreme or excessive degree of success in that arena. And so we've moved away from oh, this guy's really strong and he's doing cool things on stage, breaking stuff, into these ideas and these concepts. If we can embed them into the mind and put some practice behind them and execute them well, then ultimately what we wind up doing and course correcting any limiting beliefs or any conflicting beliefs that we have in our mind, because all of our limitations are self-imposed to a point. Like mental limitations is what I'm talking about. I mean, obviously I'm not gonna like when I was 5 years old and I climbed up on top of the house and told my mom I was going to jump off and learn how to fly because I wanted to have superpowers, she stopped me because that's not within the realm of the physics that we're talking about. But it's not impossible to fly, because how else would you come to the States or would I get to England? We have to get in the belly of a giant metal bird and fly across the great waters, right? So ultimately, superhuman powers are those things. And the way that I encourage people to use them is a criteria of 3 points. One is it allows you to fully express who you are and who you want to be. Two is that it contributes to a happy and fulfilled existence for you, a happy and fulfilled life. And 3, it makes the world a better place, because if it's not making the world a better place, you're not a superhero anymore, you're a supervillain. And I don't want to teach people to be villains. So that's kind of the overview of what I talk about in the shows. And that is sort of at the fundamental level of what I do in the coaching programs.
I mean, I suppose one of the things that people they're excited about these things, but there's often this kind of, like, you talk about kryptonite, but there is these kind of fears. That fear is a very powerful thing. I mean, how do you, because you're talking quite a lot about success, and And often people can never quite get to that thinking of success because they have this huge weight of fear around fear of failure, whatever they're carrying with them. I mean, for example, did strength come easy to you? I mean, did developing yourself physically and mentally, did it come easy, or was it? I mean, was it something that was exciting, you just ran with it, or was it something you really struggled with?
It was exciting and I ran with it, and there have been extremely difficult times for me, and there have been extremely easy times. And I find that if I tell myself that it's going to be really difficult and I'm going to have a hard time, then that winds up being my experience. And I find that if I tell myself things like, okay, there's information here that I don't yet know and don't yet understand, so I'm going to have to learn that, and there's going to be some effort that goes into that, and I'm going to have to devote some energy and attention to that, but I'm perfectly capable of doing it. How easy can I make the learning process? Then it's actually much easier. It really is a self-fulfilling um, uh, prophecy in that regard. As far as fear goes, I talk to a lot of people about a lot of fears that they have, and a big concept that resonates with a lot of folks that I work with is this. And we were born with only two fears in our lives as a little infant. And if you have a young child, then you're probably aware of this. My son reinforced this to me greatly a couple years ago when he was born. We are afraid of two things: falling or being dropped, like a sudden drop, and then sudden loud noises, like, if you're holding a sleeping baby and next to a car and someone honks the horn, he's not going to be happy about that most of the time. Those are the only two things we're afraid of when we're born. That's it. Anything else that we're afraid of from that point in our life forward is a learned behavior. It's a learned condition. Now, whether it was taught to us by someone without our consent before we knew better, by using words and using attitudes that I have made conscious efforts, and my wife has too, to not instill in our son things like, be careful, you're going to fall. Be careful, you'll fall and hurt yourself. That kind of stuff. We don't say those things to him because we both realize that those were limitations that were instilled in us for no good reason. The people who teach us those things mean well, because they see their job as protecting and caring for us, and they see it as an act of love to tell us to be afraid because it's protective. But they're ignorant of the fact that most of the stuff that we are taught to be afraid of, either from parents or school or the media or whatever, is actually not a clear and present danger. It's more just something conceptual that can't really do us any harm. So if it can't do us any harm, there's no need to be afraid of it. You can respect it. You can understand that if you get deeply involved in something, it might wind up turning out poorly for you. But there's no reason to be afraid of almost anything. Now, like, we will tell our son, hey, don't go play in the middle of the road because cars are coming, they may not see you. That's a big, big difference between saying, be careful, don't go over there, you're going to get hurt. And if you listen to the way that I said those two things, you can sort of feel the energy that those words carry. Words are representations of concepts and ideas. And by getting very clear on what they mean, we can effectively communicate better, both with people outside of ourselves and within ourselves, in programming our own mind. As far as what you said earlier, Paul, about the fear of failure, I stopped having a fear of failure when I, first of all, looked at, what does that really even mean? Why am I afraid to fail? Well, what does fail mean? And most of us, I believe, think that failure is some sort of a defeat, that we're done, that it's over with, and that there's pain associated with it. And, everyone's going to make fun of us, and what will people think, and blah, blah, blah. And you can go on down that rabbit hole. I redefined failure in my own mind as it's simply part of the process of learning. When we were all first learning how to count, this is how my son at age 2.5 counts: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10. 9. He's learning the order of the numbers. He doesn't know what those numbers represent yet, but he's memorizing that sequence. And occasionally we'll correct him and he'll get it right. And then occasionally we just let him go with that because that's where he is in his development. So if we redefine failure as part of the learning experience, then we can leverage it, right? So, and you're not going to tell a 2.5-year-old kid, no, you failed when you counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10. That's wrong. Don't do that. People are going to make fun of you. He's 2. No one cares, right? Now, if we were to go out and count that way in front of adults, people might look at us strange and they might think we made a mistake. But it still wouldn't be this crushing defeat that we build failure up in our mind to be. And that's a minor example, but the sentiment is the same. The feeling is the same. It's like, how many things have any of us not done in our life because we were just afraid we'd fail on the front end? And doesn't that equal the same result? If I don't do it, or if I do it and fail at it and the whole thing goes to hell, isn't that the same result? So what harm is there in using failure as part of the learning process? Because even if I do crash and burn miserably, it's still not a failure because now I know something that I didn't know before I attempted to do it.
I mean, so go on, James.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say we had Perry Nicholson on a few weeks ago.
I love Perry.
Yeah, and one of the things he said, which I loved, was he said, if you've got some, we're trying to treat something, or, you've got some ailment and we're trying to work out what it is and how to make it better. And he says, if we do something and it works, check the win box. And he says, if we do something and it doesn't work, check the win box, because we know that doesn't work and we can move on to something else. So it's just that kind of like, you say, I love what you're saying. It just ties in so well. Yeah.
I mean, here's one of the, sorry. Oh, I was going to say,
Perry's one of my favorite people because of that. I met Perry, I don't know, probably 2008, 2009. And his thought process and his way of communicating with people and treating patients has evolved dramatically year to year, because he is willing to do something and willing to have it not work, and then willing to figure out from that, what could I do differently to make it work? Which that's the definition of failure that I'm talking about right there.
One of the things I hear from clients, particularly before I start working with them, is I'm an all or nothing person. And it's just got me thinking, when you're talking about failure, that often people build up that they're very, very extreme, even on things that don't require extreme kind of methods. Most people's fitness goals do not need extreme methods to achieve them. But we talk in terms of all or nothing. Do you come across that much with your clients? Do you come across it with the people you coach?
Absolutely. And the first point of addressing that is to help them understand that the very fact of saying, I am an all or nothing person, that is something that you learned. You weren't born that way. And that is something that you are continuing to reinforce because it's an I am statement. If we say I am, anything that follows that, good, bad, or indifferent, is a creative statement. You are literally speaking circumstances into existence, or speaking things that reinforce current circumstances by saying that. So there's a big difference between saying I'm an all or nothing person and saying, when I do things, I like to go all in and be fully committed, or I don't like to do them at all. And it sounds like it's the same thing, but it's not. The difference being the person who says, when I do things, I like to fully commit and fully be into it, or I don't want to do it. That person, by and large, is successful at whatever they set out to do. They tend to reach whatever objective they set for themselves. The other person who says I'm an all or nothing person is all in until the first thing pops up that derails them, and then they're all out.
Yeah.
So that is completely a mental construct that can be changed.
And you change it by just, do you see the language first, or do you think there's got to be some inner mechanics that need to change?
It's inner mechanics, because language is representative of whatever's going on in thought and feeling. The very first place to start with that, the fundamentals of it, is, first of all, uncritically observe yourself and see how you are reacting to circumstances and conditions, and see what things you are doing and saying to create circumstances and conditions in your life. Most of us think that we have our shit together. Most of us think that we are good people. Most of us like to, like to think these things about ourselves. We like to think that we're kind and generous and all that kind of stuff. But if we uncritically observe ourselves, we see that the way we react to other people around us isn't always good. It isn't always kind, and that we may think that we're all or nothing, that we can, do anything. But then the first minor little obstacle pops up and we give up. So if we have a conflict in our own mind that we really believe that we are a certain way, and we're trying to say out loud that we are a different way, then ultimately those conflicting beliefs rail against each other, and whatever is deeply programmed in the subconscious is what's going to win. If your desire and your belief don't line up with each other, then your belief is going to win. So looking at yourself uncritically, like for example, since the majority of our clients, and we're talking earlier, you said something while we were before we started recording, where you said something about a constant battle with calories. I'm assuming that we're talking about people who come to you as clients who want to lose some body fat.
Yes.
If you approach that as a constant battle with calories, first of all, if you really think that that's the case, just don't fight. Stop eating completely and see how well that works. You'll lose a lot of weight, and it will be fast, but it won't be healthy and it won't be sustainable, right? So if we are constantly constructing battles and fights and things to overcome in our mind, telling ourselves things are going to be hard, then that's the experience that we wind up having.
It's that very much the society wants people to be warriors. You see it in the advertising
Absolutely.
and marketing.
Well, and in politics, right? I mean, look at everything that's gone on in the past 8 months or so in the States over here. Fear is what can be used to control people. And it starts at a very young age, like with little kids. Don't do that, or you're going to get in trouble. That's how the majority of people are raised, is to use fear as a controlling tool. I don't want to go too deep into this right now, but look at most organized religion. It's based on the idea that if you do what we say, then everything's going to be okay. But if you don't, you're going to die and go to hell forever, right? And just that kind of fear-based thinking really doesn't have a place in my life, and I encourage people not to have it. So I went off on a tangent myself there. So to go back to the fundamental stuff, if we look at, I was going to talk about the fat loss thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm all over the place this morning. My coffee's starting to kick in. If we go back and look at the fat loss idea of belief versus desire, somebody comes to you and they really, really want to get in shape. They want to lose some body fat, and they got a very, very clear, defined outcome that they want to achieve. And deep in their subconscious, they see themselves like I used to see myself as a fat kid that stuttered. No amount of willpower, force, pushing yourself past your limits, beast mode, insert relevant hashtag here, is going to produce a sustainable change in that. As fitness professionals and as clients of fitness professionals who might be listening to this, how many of us know of, or maybe have even been, that person that gains and loses the same 15 or 20 pounds a dozen times in the past 10 years, right? Why does that happen? It's because we're all or nothing on it, right? I'm either all in, okay, now I've achieved the goal. Well, once that goal is achieved, if your subconscious doesn't line up with that, if your self-image doesn't line up with that, it will immediately begin to reroute you, just like an automatic pilot on an airplane or GPS on a car, right? If you program in something in your GPS and you're following the directions, and then you divert and don't change the final destination, it will continually give you directions back to that same place. So if you change your mind about where you want to go, but you don't change the instructions in the GPS, it's never going to get you there, ever. So when we have conflicting beliefs, internal beliefs like that, especially ones that we haven't identified, then we wind up in the place of, I don't know why I did that. You know, I was doing so well on my diet and my training program, and I lost 15 pounds, and I was, and we can even cite cases where people bring morality into it. I was doing really good and I was being really good. And then over the weekend, I was really, really bad. And I ate fish and chips and I drank beer and I ate a whole cheesecake and I was really bad. And now I need you to kick my ass. Do you see like how twisted up and how low the self-worth is in the person who's doing that? But as fitness people, we've all either dealt with that or even been that person. So it comes down to a fundamental change in how we think about ourselves. So going back to the fundamentals, we uncritically observe ourselves. And if we see ourselves acting in a way or thinking thoughts in a way or speaking things in a way that do not line up with what we want to accomplish, then we are pitted against ourselves. And some people take great pride in that. They love to boast about their limitations. Mm. I know a person who is very, very proud of the fact that she is extremely clumsy, and she falls down and sprains her wrist or twists an ankle or breaks an arm 2 or 3 times a year, right? She's constantly, tripping over a piece of carpet or something, right? And I'm like, what if you stopped telling yourself that you're clumsy and really believed it? What if you stopped telling yourself, change this narrative in your mind? And so the second point, after we uncritically observe ourselves and see what we're actually doing, not what we want to pretend that we're doing or ignore that we're doing, and see what we're actually doing, then we can formulate a target. It's like, hey, I just got in the car and I'm going to drive to the airport and I'm going to get on a plane and I'm going to come see these guys, right? In England. Well, the airport is north of my house. And if I get on the road and just like take massive action driving south, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how hard I try, doesn't matter how much beast mode I'm in. If I'm driving in the wrong direction, I'm not going to make it to the airport. Even though the world's round, I'm still not going to make it to the airport, right? So I have to line up the objectives that I want to accomplish. And then the third step of that is be ready, be aware, and know that the thought process is going to continually pull you back toward whatever you were programmed in. And so you can take massive action against the directions of the GPS and almost wind up at your goal. But if you don't change what that actual destination is going to be, then you're not going to get there. And so when those thoughts are popping up, like if you're like, okay, I'm going to change the way I think. I'm going to stop saying that I have to suffer and sacrifice and that failure is a bad thing. And I'm going to start telling myself that failure is part of the learning process. I do not have to suffer. I do have to sacrifice, but sacrifice doesn't mean something bad. Sacrifice is simply giving up something of value in exchange for something that you perceive as having greater value. Every time you go through the drive-through at Starbucks, you're sacrificing a few bucks or a few pounds for a cup of coffee, and it's worth it to you, right? But you don't have to suffer that way. If you buy a cup of coffee for $5 and it sucks and you don't like it and you drink it anyway because you don't want to be out that $5, then you're intentionally suffering. But if you spend $5 on a cup of coffee and you love it, you didn't suffer, but in both cases, you still sacrificed the $5. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. So to kind of summarize all that, we have an uncritical self-observation of what we're actually doing. We have a definite aim, or we have a goal in mind that we want to accomplish. And then the third part of that is when we find ourselves being pulled back into our pre-established behavior patterns and our pre-established thought patterns and our pre-established beliefs, we have to detach from those things by directing our attention to whatever our goal or our definite aim is. So if I really want to get in shape and lose some body fat, and I've decided that I'm going to eat a ketogenic diet, and I find myself obsessing over chocolate chip cookies that are laden with sugar, I have to divert my attention away from those chocolate chip cookies and towards something that is compliant to the plan that I've chosen myself. And through enough repetition of that, the beliefs around it will change. It will stop being, oh, I'm struggling so hard with this. Because here's the thing about struggle. Anyone who's ever trained a grappling martial art knows that the only way that you can stop struggling with someone is to let go. If I'm holding on to something, I can struggle with it. If I release it completely and let go of it, you cannot struggle with it anymore, right? So in order to stop struggling it, you let go of it, you detach from it, you remove your energy from it, and you let it die from malnutrition as you direct your energy toward whatever the thing is that you want to accomplish. And that's how we use failure as a learning tool. You know, you're going to make mistakes doing that. Mistakes are fine. Mistakes are always opportunities to learn. Like you said about Perry earlier, he successfully found something that didn't work, and he won't do that again.
Do you find, Dave, I mean, obviously, it seems to me, or I think from listening to you, you went on the sort of the physical journey of gaining, physical strength. And then was it going on that sort of physical journey of becoming stronger and seeing how you could, I suppose you could almost say you undid your kind of previous programming of being, like you said, the younger kind of overweight kid with the stutter, and you became strong physically. Did that then help you to start to tap into all of this mindset stuff that you're talking about now? I mean, do you think there's something because strength is so tangible, because you can see how tangibly, you lifted 40 pounds, now you can lift 80 pounds, and you made a decision in your mind to train in a way to make that happen. Is that the way it kind of worked for you? Or do you think that this kind of mindset and changing in mindset was going on behind the scenes, but you weren't really aware of it at the time?
It was going on behind the scenes for a long time, because I was involved in strength training for a long time. And my earliest forays into strength training is much like anyone of my age demographic. It started with bodybuilding. You know, the vast majority of people, especially before there were things like, CrossFit and functional training and whatever that means, the vast majority of us came to strength training through bodybuilding, thinking that looking like Arnold or Ferrigno in contest shape equaled being strong, when anyone who knows anything about it on a deep level knows that that's not necessarily the case. Those guys train to look a certain way. They may or may not be strong. Some of them are incredibly strong, some of them not so much. So for me, it was going through that process of looking at bodybuilding and then finding things like powerlifting and seeing these guys do these amazing feats of strength and wanting to do that. But I also noticed and just accepted that part of it was you're going to break something along the way. And, if you see the people who are locked into that all or nothing beast mode mentality posting on social media, it almost always looks like this. 8 months out of the year, I'm getting ready to compete at, the national level, or I'm doing this and I'm unstoppable and hashtag beast mode. And then the other 4 months out of the year, it's like, oh, I can't wait for my shoulder to heal up, or damn it, I blew out my hip again, and it's a function, I believe, of that all or nothing. If you go all in all the time and talk about how you're going to force your body to adapt and push past your limitations and all that, if you truly go past your physical limitations, something will break by definition. If you say you went past the limitation physically and something didn't break, it wasn't a physical limitation, it was a mental limitation, right? And so, and as far as forcing your body to adapt, you can't control adaptation. It doesn't have an off switch. You are constantly adapting to whatever you're doing. Case in point on something like that, if you've ever worked with let's create a fictitious client who is in their 40s. They've been working a desk job for 20 years. They've never done anything physical, and they come in and you're doing your assessment on them. Their desk job involves them working at a computer, and they have a kyphotic curve in the thoracic spine. Well, what's going on here? We can rationally deconstruct that and say, okay, you're sitting at a desk in sort of a hunched over position for work all day. You're sitting in a car in the same position, driving back and forth to work. You're sitting in that same position when you eat, when you watch TV, and most of us go into sort of a fetal position type thing when we go to sleep. So this person's body is perpetually in this thoracic flexion position. Over the course of 2 decades, the bones will reform themselves and adapt to that position so that is the default. That's the normal. How much effort did they put into that? How hardcore did they have to train to cause their bones to adapt to that posture? Zero. It's possible to create adaptations in the body with zero effort. Like, how many of us would go out into the bright sunshine wanting to get a tan and take off our shirt like, tan, damn it, I'm gonna tan, I'm extreme tanning, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And if you're a pale skinned blonde or red haired blue eyed person, and it's like, look, it's really simple, just take off all your clothes, go sit out in the hot sun on the beach somewhere for 9 hours, and no, you won't get a tan, you'll get burnt up and have to go to the hospital, right? So
you haven't been to the U when it's some sun. I mean, we get like 20 minutes of sun. And you have to plan it, and you have to get out there, and people will try and soak up as much sun in 20 minutes as possible.
Yeah. And within 20 minutes, they can't really do that much damage. But if you take someone, say, from Belfast and drop them in Egypt and say, okay, go get your tan on, and they try that same strategy for 3 hours, it's not going to turn out well for them, right? Because
that's the thing.
Yeah. So the old saying of nature, in order to be commanded, must first be obeyed. I think Sir Francis Bacon said that, is absolutely true 100% of the time. So if we want to reprogram our mind, we have to look at how it was programmed in the first place, right? And so that was part of my journey, is looking at these feats of strength and looking at how people would get hurt. First of all, I had to accept the fact that it's not necessary to get hurt to get strong. And when I started questioning that, I started questioning everything about my training. Okay, so how hard do I have to train? Because is training harder always better? No. If you were going to get some pain medication from a doctor and he gave you, I don't know, Oxycontin, and said, take one of these every 12 hours and it'll take care of your pain until your injury's healing up, and you decided, well, if one every 12 hours is good, then 5 every 3 hours must be better, right? It must be, 20 times better because of the math that I just did. And by the way, I'm high on Oxycontin in case that math doesn't make sense. But that doesn't work, right? So what we need to look at is what's the minimal effective amount of something that we need in order to get the adaptation from our body that we want, because the adaptation has no off switch. So if we take someone from the UK who gets 20 minutes of sunshine, 3 times over the course of the summer, and we want to get them tan in an environment where they have unlimited sun, we might do 4 or 5 minutes a day, every day for 6 weeks, and they wind up with a nice little tan, right? I mean, I'm just hypothetically creating a situation here. But for me, understanding that the minimum effective amount of stimulus is what will produce the desired result, and that anything beyond that is not only not contributing, but could be counterproductive. Now my target isn't to look and see how hard I can train or how hard I can push myself. Now my target is, what do I need to do today that will be a small step in the direction that I want to go? And it was very natural for me to back away from that and look at areas outside of physical training because of a single event that happened for me. When I was first learning to do feats of strength, and this is one of the rare times that I can go back and pinpoint a moment in time that was pivotal for me, where, it's like the Lou Ferrigno thing. That was a pivotal moment for me that altered my life. I was working on a feat of strength where I take a small nail and I wrap the head of it with a piece of cloth, hold it in my hand, and drive it through a board without a hammer and have the nail come out the bottom of the board. The first time that I remember seeing that feat done was a video that Dennis Rogers sent me of him doing the feat, and he was driving the nail through a board and I believe a frying griddle like you would cook pancakes on, and a piece of a license plate. So he's going through a couple of pieces of metal and through an inch thick board. And he had done this feat literally thousands and thousands of times. There was a few issues that popped up with his equipment. His pad was worn out and not working the way that it should. And then there was some problems with his setup that caused the force not to go into the board, but bounce back into him. And so in this video, he swings around with this incredible amount of speed, incredible amount of force, hits the target, and rather than go through the board and the frying pan and the license plate, the nail winds up embedded in his hand. Caught it on video. Caught the subsequent trip to the emergency room and the extraction of the nail on video. This video isn't publicly available, but when he and I first started working together, this was fairly recent. It happened like a couple of years before that. He sent me the video, and that was like the first time that I remembered seeing this feat being done. So when I'm working on that feat, in order to do that, you have to generate a tremendous amount of speed. You have to be, for that instant, all or nothing. This nail is going through this board. And if you're not, then it's not going to work. And I could feel like this twinge of apprehension every time I'd attempt to do the feat. And I would hit the board and the nail would go in, but it wouldn't penetrate all the way and come out the other side. So I wound up going and training with him face to face. And he coached me on it. He looked at my technique. My technique was spot on. And he said, "You're strong enough to do this." And I'm like, "I know, that's why I'm so frustrated. I know I'm strong enough to do this, but I don't know what's going on." And I told him about this kind of apprehension. And he's like, "Look, you've got to get all of that fear, all of that doubt, all of that limitation out of your mind, because in a case like this, your mind is controlling your body." And that just really resonated with me. And I'm like, okay, so having done some breath work and meditation for years and years and kind of working on visualization that way, I went, sat down and just created a scene in my mind where there was a balloon on the other side of the board. And then in my mind, I eliminated the board and just popped the balloon with the nail. And I ran through that a few times and kind of got really immersed in what that looked like, what it felt like, went back over to the board and drove the nail so far through that I banged my knuckles on the board. So what changed? Did my physical abilities change? No. The only thing that changed is how I was approaching the task. And I knew that all of the issues that had resulted in Dennis's injury were not present in the attempts that I was doing, because again, he failed at that and learned from it, and he won't make that mistake again, right? So he was making sure that I was safe. I trusted him. I trusted my own abilities. And at that point, I had completely detached from the possibility that it could go wrong and I could get hurt. And there was nothing else in the way. In my mind, anybody can take a pointy nail and pop a balloon with it. There just happened to be a board nearby, but that wasn't even of consequence to me. So that moment was when I realized that changing the way that you think about things changes the things that you think about. And so I've never missed that feat in a show since then. The only time I'll miss it now is if I take a long break from it and I try to do something that's a little bit harder than what I'm capable of doing right now. But I have no doubt in my mind that within a week and a half or 2 weeks of practicing that feat, I can drive a nail through just about anything that I set up in front of me. That phrase that's lodged in my mind when Dennis said that about removing doubt and limitation from your mind because your mind controls your body was the pebble in the pond that set me to studying how the mind works from a very practical, tactical, and tangible level. So I started reading like Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, because parallel to this, I was running my gym, doing my business, doing workshops, and wanting to grow my business as a strongman, all that kind of stuff. So I started reading various entrepreneurial things about how the mind works. And in Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill says, what the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Well, that sounds an awful lot like remove doubt and limitation from your mind because your mind controls your body. And that phrase from Napoleon Hill has actually evolved in my mind. I replaced the word man with my own name, and I removed the word can. And so instead of what the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve, much like adaptation having no off switch, our mind, our subconscious mind doesn't have an off switch. It's constantly taking this input and it's constantly producing results as an effect of that. I changed the phrasing to whatever the mind of Dave conceives and believes, it achieves. Now that sounds very motivational and very rah-rah, but if we consider that if you replace your name with that, whatever your mind conceives and believes, if it conceives and believes things that you want to have happen, then it achieves those things. If it conceives and believes things that you don't want to have happen, like, oh, I'm so clumsy, I'm always falling down and hurting myself. Well, that's what you wind up achieving. And it's not a matter of good or bad. It's just a matter of information. The subconscious is like electricity. It is just a power. And you can use electricity to cook your food and light your house, or you can use electricity to completely destroy everything around you, and yourself included. So being able to understand that is what it means when Dennis said the mind controls the body. Now, I don't think he ever put it together in that kind of clarity. I think that he just sort of instinctually knew, and through his practice was able to achieve things because he was able to focus his desire and his attention in that way. But I became very interested in how to deconstruct it, how to apply it to any area of life. And the next phase obviously was, if I can do it for myself, because it worked wonderfully in every area of my life, relationships, business, writing my books, all of that kind of stuff. The next logical step was, okay, if it works for me, can I coach other people through it? So I started using it with people who were coming into the gym, and I started using it primarily with them either creating a scene where they were able to do a particular physical thing that they may not have been able to do before. Like multiple people that I trained for certifications, I'm like, okay, I want you to create a scene where you've just passed your snatch test. What does it feel like? Or I want you to create a scene where it's 3 months after you've been through your certification and you're listed on the website as an instructor now. How does that feel? And get them really involved in how that feels, and then let the process sort of unfold and just pay attention to it. That's what the mind controlling the body really means. And the other thing, other group of people that I worked with were people who were primarily interested in physique transformation, losing fat and gaining muscle. And so reprogramming their self-image from I'm fat, I've tried everything, nothing ever works for me, I'll give this a shot, but I'm pretty sure that it's all going to fall apart, and I really struggle with eating things right, and I know that I'm being good when I'm eating right, and then when I'm not eating right and I'm being bad, and I beat myself up over it, and I feel so guilty, and all of that head trash is learned behavior. And if you learned it, you can unlearn it and replace it with something else. So I started working with people on reconstructing their self-image as being fit and healthy and enjoying the things that are involved with being fit and healthy, enjoying training. That's another one. I hate working out, but I really want to get in shape. Well, you're screwed. You're screwed.
Yeah.
Because those two things are dependent on each other. So working with people on redefining themselves and getting clarity on their self-image was a huge part of that. And so it worked when people would do the work that I gave them. And I experimented with different ways to do that, and found some that worked great, found some that I discarded, just like anything else. I saw that I could combine the feats of strength and the principles that I was using to help people change their idea of themselves and change their belief systems so that it matched up with who they wanted to be, what they wanted to have, and what they wanted to do. That it worked very well, it worked very effectively, and it worked almost, I don't want to say effortlessly, because some effort and some energy has to be put into it, but it worked without having to beat yourself into submission and punish yourself into success. Yeah. And so that is the crux of everything that I do with Superhuman You coaching now.
Brilliant. I mean, particularly what you were talking about at the end there, very, very poignant for me. Big struggle. My own personal thing is, I never came from a strength background, so everything always seems heavy. And getting into that mindset where you're not just seeing the failure before you start, I think that's so important. It's one of the big. It's part of what's been so fascinating talking about you today is trying to get out of the way of myself and hearing the way you talk about it, because someone like Dennis Rogers is a small guy, but he has incredible amount of strength. And that mind muscle connection. I think that's what's so pure about strength training and physical activity is that it is just such a raw expression of these kind of inner kind of struggles and inner conversations that if you can get on top of, they have such a massive kind of effect on other areas of your life, perhaps ones that aren't as measurable. We can measure how much you can lift, We can't always measure what it is to be a good parent. We can't, those things that, there are things that you can say dictate whether you're a good parent, but they're not necessarily easy to pinpoint, but physical training has that effect to kind of really influence other things and just change our perspective on things. I mean, we're aware of the time, and I think it's such an awesome place for us to finish on. But James, do you have anything that you wanted to?
I was going to ask, actually, I think we've probably covered it in what we've talked about, but the question that I had from Jim Hatcher that he sent to us, which was, if I can ask that to you, Dave, but I think you've probably covered it in what we spoke about, unless there's anything else to add. He said, most great leaders like yourself have mentors along the way and people who keep them true to themselves. Who are those people in your life? Was one of the questions that Jim had for you. And I know you spoke about Dennis Rogers quite a lot today, but is there anyone else who's been like a mentor to you, through your life up to date and career?
As a strongman, Dennis Rogers, absolutely. There are several other guys that there's a continuum there that goes from influence to mentor, and the line can be kind of blurry. So there are other people who I consider to be influences as a strongman. One of them is John Brookfield, Bud Jeffries that we talked about earlier. And sometimes an influence can just be a colleague. Sometimes a colleague can be a mentor, and you can go back and forth with that. So there's a lot of, like, if I start trying to list off everybody, we'll run out of time and I'll miss somebody. So I'm not even going to attempt to go any further with that. So from the strength world, there are a lot of people. Marty Gallagher was definitely one of them. At one point in time, it was a lot of my colleagues when I was in Strong First in the RKC, that I learned a lot of information from those guys. From a mental standpoint, it's interesting to me that a lot of the strength training stuff and a lot of the mindset stuff kind of comes from the same period in time, the late 1800s and early 1900s. Oh, and I will say this though, Dennis Rogers, obviously, Dennis Rogers' mentor is a guy named Slim the Hammerman. He just turned 87 years old a few days ago, and I met him probably 15 years ago or so, and he has, or maybe not that long, maybe 12 years ago. And he has been a huge influence, and I've gone and trained with him as a mentor. I could tell stories about him for hours. So I'm not even going to start in with that. So he was definitely a strongman mentor. And then also an influence, someone that I never met, was a guy named the Mighty Atom, who was Slim's mentor. So like if you use martial arts terminology, my lineage would be the Mighty Atom, Slim the Hammerman, Dennis Rogers, and then myself and all of the other people who've learned from Dennis, because they are many. From a mental aspect though, I kind of threw myself into that early 1900s New Thought era of people like Napoleon Hill, Wallace Wattles, Neville Goddard. Those are probably the big ones. People who are still living, Bob Proctor was definitely a big influence on me. I never actually met Bob Proctor in person yet, but I have been through coaching programs of his and digested a lot of his material. Another guy who is a friend and mentor and sometimes student is Dr. Joe Vitale, who was in the movie The Secret a few years ago. Joe developed an interest in strength when he was a kid, much like I did. And I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago, we connected on Facebook. After I had like read a bunch of his books and bought a bunch of his material, he reached out to me because he was interested in feats of strength. He wound up coming to Old Time Strongman University, and he was the catalyst of me writing Superhuman You, because I went and spent the weekend with him in Texas with the understanding that I would teach him what I knew and he would teach me what he knew. And he asked me if I'd ever thought about writing a book based on all of the stuff like we've been talking about today. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, okay, when are you going to send me the rough draft? And I just kind of offhandedly said, this was in December. I offhandedly said, I don't know, how about mid-February? And he held out his hand and said, let's shake on it. And I shook hands with him. I'm like, wait a minute, I just agreed to write a book and I don't even have an outline, right? So, but I did send him the rough draft in the mid-February, and I had the hard copy of the book in mid-March. So he's definitely an influence and a mentor for me in that regard. Another guy is Wim Hof. We talked about my freezer at the beginning, but we haven't talked about Wim at all. There's another parallel story that I could talk about for hours, that meeting and training with Wim Hof was absolutely pivotal, because it was Wim and his approach that helped me to understand that the breath is the bridge between the mind and the body. We can use our breath to consciously control our physiology in certain ways. And part of that physiology has to do with getting into a specific brainwave state so that we can more easily influence our subconscious mind. And so those breathing techniques and meditation techniques that go along with the Wim Hof method and a few other breath work things that I've studied over the years definitely are a huge part of things that I've adapted into reprogramming the mind. And then
I think, Dave, did you actually you went out to Poland, didn't you, and trained with Wim? Is that right?
no, we did it in Colorado.
You did in Colorado, yeah, because I know you trained with him in person, didn't you? I remember seeing that a number of years ago. Yeah.
In 2016, I did a weekend workshop in May, and then a week-long workshop in November with a group of about 30 other people who were the first group of U.S. instructors for the Wim Hof method. It was a fantastic weekend, and I cannot say enough good things about the whole experience with Wim Hof. So his website, wimhofmethod.com, there's some phenomenal life-changing information there that all begins with a breath. And then I guess the last one that is on my mind when you ask about influences, mentors, and that kind of stuff, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this guy. When I was a teenager, I decided that I wanted to be a musician. My dad was a musician, and he was a country and Western singer, guitar player, that kind of stuff. Did it professionally for a long time. I got turned on to music at a very young age, and at about age 12 or 13, I got introduced to the mighty Edward Van Halen, who passed away last year. And I was obsessed with Eddie Van Halen for a long time. But what I see now is his approach that redefined entire areas of music, both in technical playing and in how the business works and in how equipment's used. His influence is so far reaching. Like, the thing that I really identify with now as an older guy looking back on all that is he had an idea, he had a vision, and he pushed aside everything that got in his way and focused on that vision of creating the music that he heard in his mind. And some of the stuff that he pushed aside was decades of alcoholism that, he finally got clean and sober toward the end of his life. But he was a huge impact on me. And I'm only now realizing how big an impact he had on me. And then the final one, of course, I've mentioned him several times, would be my dad, who passed away last year also. And a quick story on mind controlling the body. And I don't want anyone to misconstrue what I'm about to say, because take what I'm saying factually and don't read anything into it that I'm not actually saying. We lost my mom in 2013 to lung cancer. And in 2015, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. And he's in his mid 70s at this point, or late 70s at this point. He goes to do the chemo and radiation thing after having cared for my mom through several years of that. And anyone who's ever witnessed that knows that how unpleasant it is and how horrific it can be, that just dealing with the disease and dealing with the side effects of the treatment. He went to one chemo and radiation appointment, went home, threw up blood, and called me up and he said, "I'm not going to do this." They gave him approximately 6 to 9 months if he went untreated. And he said, "I'm not going to do this. If I've only got a few months left, I want to enjoy them and not be sick for the next 3 years when I can enjoy myself for the next 3 months and live my life for the next 3 months." And so he and I started talking about the mind control in the body. And we had been for years. And I still have from when we cleaned out all his stuff and sold his sold his house and his land and all that, I have a stack of index cards that he hand wrote. Let me put my glasses on and I'll read one little bit of it here. He said, "I'm happy and grateful that my immune system is keeping every cell of my body healthy." So he would write out these affirmations like this daily. He would use his imagination to visualize himself. He created a scene where he's looking at his iPad with the imaging from his CT scans and seeing that he was healthy and there was no presence of cancer on it. And so he went through this process, never had another dose of chemo or radiation, and decided to take matters into his own hands, started researching alternative, like nutritional things and herbal remedies and that kind of stuff. And he passed away a little over a year ago in May of last year, but he was diagnosed with whatever stage it was, stage 3, I think, and given 6 to 9 months as an optimistic amount of time that was left. If he didn't get treatment, he decided to forego that treatment and lasted 5 years. And at the very end, the last long afternoon that we spent together, he told me that he was tired and that he knew that everything in this world wears out and that it was time, and his body had worn out. His mind was still sharp. He was still able to have great conversations. And so I'm thankful for that. But like, his attitude at the end was, the vessel that my spirit is in is worn out and it's time for me to do whatever's next. So I love you. Take care of the grandson, and we'll see you when you see you, kind of thing. And so the influence that he has had on me from the very beginning, which I don't think I mentioned, is he was the first person I ever saw lever lift a sledgehammer when I was a little kid. All the way up to the very end, he had this influence on me. He had, he was always encouraging, whether it was music or strongman or whatever I wanted to do. He always told me that if I put my mind into it, I would be able to accomplish anything that I wanted to do. And he is the first and last influence that I can talk about, mentor or otherwise. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about him in a situation like this, since you asked the question.
Dave,
that's a long answer. That's a very long answer for Jim Hatcher.
Dave, that is incredible. I mean, that is what you were talking about there, I think will resonate with so many people, and especially where you said about the programming that many of us give our children, or we're given as children, sort of unconsciously by kind of loving parents who don't really realize what they're doing. I mean, the way you spoke about your father there, and the way you're obviously trying to, you're raising your son now is really incredible. So just want to say thank you so much, Dave. It's been I mean, I'd love to speak to you again. I'd love to speak to you again about the Wim Hof stuff. I mean, we haven't even touched on that, I know.
Well, if I can cut you off, for just a moment. I know that when we talked before we started recording, I said that I needed to end at a particular time, but I just got a text that thing is not happening now. So I can keep going for another 10 minutes or so if you guys want to, and if not, then we can wrap it up now if you guys have other stuff to do.
I think I think the point that you left us with there with your dad, that's had quite an impact on me personally anyway. So I think I'm quite I'd love to speak to you again, Dave. I really would, but I think the way you've wrapped up that piece there is that was fantastic. Paul, would you like to say anything, Paul?
I mean, for me, it's easy. My own personal journey when I started, and it's been a theme in a lot of these podcasts we've done right from the start, is to get away from just pure techniques. Those are the things that I craved right at the start when I was looking to get fit and healthy. Was like, what's the best tool for the job, whatever. But as I've gone through this, and it's certainly what I've seen with my clients when I've been talking to people and listening to people who are experts in their areas, is that perhaps how we search for the principles and how we experiment and how we view our world is even more, is so much more influential. It's so much more powerful. You know, tools change, fashions change, but you're talking about, you know, the thinkers from the 19th century and 18th century, you know, and you know, we're in the 21st century now, and the early 20th century. These are influential people, and some of those principles haven't really changed. The application has, because we're in a different era. You're using the internet now, where in the past it would have been books, it would have been people talking to other people in person. And I think that's what makes podcasts so great, is that we can talk about these principles and try and spread a word around. Maybe if you just change the way you approach things, maybe if you explore the journey, then, you know, you'll move away from that calorie counting. You'll move away from, I've got to lose 10 pounds in 6 weeks kind of thinking, which ultimately is not going to lead you anywhere. And listening to your story, Dave, your journey started when you were 8. I mean, maybe before, but from the age of 8, when you were inspired by something. And it's very powerful to hear that. So thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I think there's so much there that we could have just delved into. It's so deep. Each of those areas, whether it was just like the mind muscle control, the breathing, the all or nothing thinking, we could go into those in so much more detail. And perhaps, you know, if you're kind enough with your time in the future, we could do. The only thing I'll leave you with is I've got a very similar experience to Dennis Rogers that actually happened to me today. Whilst he was using a nail to put through a piece of wood, I did step on a tack, and that went into my heel, and it did hurt a lot. So it's not quite the same as a nail, but I like to think I did experience some of his pain. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Dave, can I just ask if people, I'm sure that many of our listeners will want to, to follow you more and find out more. And I know you mentioned earlier the superhumanucoaching.com. Is that the best place for people to find you, or is there other sort of social media kind of, forums or whatever the word is that people can kind of follow you and find out more?
Superhumanucoaching.com is probably the best place to go. That will get you, if you go there, there's this video that I share that has a presentation about a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, kind of condensed down, and some action steps to put into place. And also that'll get you on my email list. So you can go there. As far as social media goes, on all the relevant social medias, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, I'm Iron Tamer on those. And on Facebook, if you go to Dave Whitley, Iron Tamer, maybe it's David Whitley. I don't know. If you search Iron Tamer or search Dave Whitley on Facebook, and I have my personal page and I have the professional page. I also have a private Facebook group that you guys were talking about earlier on Superhuman You Coaching, that there's probably 1,200 people in there. And I haven't been posting a lot of stuff over the past few months, or past few weeks rather, but I have a list of things that I'm about to start putting more content in there. I'm on there, and I also have a YouTube channel, but there's not a whole lot on it that is relevant to what we're talking about. But if you look up Iron Tamer on YouTube, it's mostly me doing feats of strength and occasionally me talking about something that I believe is relevant. So I'm not hard to find.
There's one thing, I mean, at some point we'll ask you in the future, but your Iron Tamer is a name, and I was just wondering, was that something that was given to you? Did you choose it yourself? Was that part of creating that mental image in your head of someone who's strong? That's interesting to me. You know,
there was a Russian Olympic weightlifter named Yuri Vlasov, and he was probably in the 1950s, 1960s, and I read a quote from him where he referred to training in general, as far as lifting and getting stronger, as the jolly game of taming iron. And I thought, taming iron, you're taking this inanimate object and you are subjecting your will to it and bringing it into submission. I like that a lot. Cool. So from that came Iron Tamer.
Brilliant. Well, we always like to get a bit of, I see it's like a stage name. I like it because, you know, you talked about Van Halen. This podcast is named after Space Oddity by David Bowie, who was obviously
Sure.
Ziggy Stardust and had his own kind of stage kind of presence and would inhabit different personalities. But anyway, okay, so thanks for listening, guys. This has been Health Oddity. As ever, if you could write a review, post that on the iTunes or Spotify, subscribe to the YouTube channel or to whatever app you're listening to this whole thing on. But thanks once again. And we're going to bring you some more great guests next week. So goodbye.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.